Welcome back to Golic Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., hour number 2 of the show. Dan Wolken going to join us to talk a little college football. Dan, did you ever think you'd see a world at this point in the season where all of a sudden preseason 1 and 2 were completely out of the top 25?
I really think it speaks to just kind of where we are in college football right now, where the rosters are just changing so much year to year. The dynamics are different. Obviously, we don't know the impact in the locker room of how people get paid and those kinds of things. I know we don't like to talk about that, but I do think that does impact these teams to some degree. And there's just a lot of different chemistry in the mix that we didn't have to worry about before that I do think now contributes directly to how these teams are performing week in and week out. It makes the game really unpredictable. And I also just think that at the top, you don't have that separation that maybe we're used to. There's just a lot more parity, 1 to probably 10, and then 10 to 20. And I just don't know that every year at this point, given the way the sport is now, that we're going to be able to predict with very much precision how these teams are going to play out.
Just how damning was that loss to James Franklin and Penn State?
I'll tell you, James Franklin, I think the one thing you could say in his favor over his dozen years in Penn State was that he didn't lose games to teams that they were supposed to beat. Okay, maybe you don't beat Ohio State enough. Maybe you don't beat Michigan enough. You're not winning enough Big Ten titles, but you're winning the games that get you to 10-win seasons, that get you to the top 10. It's pretty good. Everyone can kind of wring their hands about the other stuff. But when you start losing to a UCLA, a team that not just was 0-4, but had not led any game at any point this season, I think that's a real big problem. It speaks to, I think, a lot of things going on in that program. If James Franklin is going to sit here and tell us that they let the loss to Oregon linger to the point where they could go out and lose to UCLA, that's a coaching issue.
Yeah, I guess at this point, with the quarterback in Drew Aller that was supposed to be the prince that was promised there, with a team that returned offensive line strength, defensive line strength, went out and bought the best D coordinator that money could buy in Jim Knowles, is it fair to say if it wasn't going to happen this year, are Penn State fans allowed to wonder, I don't know if you fire James Franklin, but is there a mutual parting of ways that could help both sides? Because it just...
If I'm James Franklin, his agent, I start looking at the market. I start saying, hey, where can we possibly find a landing spot for him? Is there a program where he can reset the clock? That's the terminology these coaches use a lot, reset the clock. Because going into a job, you've probably got 3 to 4 years of a fan base that's going to be behind you, that's going to support you, and be really excited about what you're doing. When you come in there, that excitement at Penn State is long gone. This was an all-in year. They're not getting it done. And I do think coaches do get stale. I've said this before for my entire career just because I've seen it so many times. If you stay at a program beyond 10 years, I think you better be winning national championships, just because all the stuff you say, your anecdotes, your mottos, all those things, they just get tired and stale. People have heard them before. There just becomes this sort of ennui that sets in throughout the entire program. And I do think change is sometimes good. I think we may be at that point with Penn State. I don't know if it's going to be Florida, Arkansas, UCLA, other jobs that pop open, but those programs would probably be pretty excited to have a James Franklin. And I do think if I'm him, looking at the big picture, it might be time for a move.
So we talk about Penn State in the Big Ten, Michigan, certainly Ohio State and Oregon. What about Indiana sitting at number 7? Where do they fit into the equation?
Well, I was dead wrong. I thought last year was a one-off. I thought, hey, they're going to go back to normal. Maybe not bad Indiana like we were used to, but they're just going to kind of settle there somewhere in the middle of the Big Ten. And I think they've exceeded everybody's expectations of what they could be this year. Even people who were pretty optimistic about this team. Obviously, going to Oregon is going to be a huge challenge. We'll see how they handle all of that. But Cignetti, he's the real deal. And obviously their program, the way they've been able to find the right kind of players for that system. Mendoza, the quarterback, phenomenal so far. This wasn't just about Curtis Roark last year and what he did. They're a real program now. And, I don't think they're probably going to beat Oregon on the road. But I think if they just show up and play, give a good representative effort, I think that will solidify them clearly as a playoff type contender this year.
Are we back to talking about Alabama in that light too after this weekend? They get the win in the revenge game against Vanderbilt. Vandy, by all measures, a much better team even this year than they were last year when they did upset Alabama. That along with the Georgia win, are you ready to say that Kalen DeBoer has officially steadied the ship?
I think so. Kalen DeBoer is a very good football coach. We know that. There was plenty of sample size there. I think maybe they were pressured into playing Jalen Milroe, and that makes sense. I mean, he was the incumbent starter. He was the guy that going in, people thought was going to be a Heisman Trophy type candidate. He had plenty of experience. I think you probably lean to the safe side as a coach and just go with him. But Ty Simpson was a 5-star recruit. Ty Simpson was one of the top quarterbacks in high school football, goes to Alabama, remarkably stays 3 years. Anybody else in his situation, I think, would have been long gone in the portal, see what you can get somewhere else. But he stayed, waited for this opportunity, and I think we're saying he's really, really good. He probably should have played last year, if we're being honest about it. And from week one to now, he's grown so much more comfortable. He makes quick decisions, gets the ball out. I thought against Vanderbilt, he did a great job even, extemporaneous running plays, getting out of dirty pockets, extending plays, finding just places to go with the ball that maybe were off script. And I think with him playing this way, Alabama very well might be the best team in the SEC.
Arch Manning was one of the most anticipated quarterbacks to start this year. Was it just an over-evaluation for a kid that hadn't played that much?
Listen, I wrote a column before the season started saying, let's just slow down here, because if you watch that Texas team a year ago, they really struggled in the second half of the season offensively. Quinn Ewers was not healthy. He was not performing well. And yet Steve Sarkisian never made the switch. And I was sitting there watching Texas last year in some of those final games leading up to the playoff thinking, all right, are they going to give Arch a chance here? Because if they feel like they have a chance to win a national title, I'm not sure if Quinn Ewers is giving them the best chance, but they never made the change. And maybe that spoke volumes about what Texas thought they had internally in their quarterback room. And maybe we're seeing that play out now, that Arch, I don't know if it's a matter of he just needs more time and experience, or maybe he's just not that level of player. We'll see. Time will tell. But right now he's not playing well. They've obviously have other issues. Their offensive line is a bit of a mess, and I'm sure that's contributing to some of the struggles and the lack of confidence we're seeing from Arch Manning. But if he were truly the kind of elite quarterback that maybe a lot of people expected, Texas would be better than they are now, and I think we can be honest about that.
It certainly seems to be the case. On the top end of things, one team we haven't talked about yet, Miami, checks in at number two this week, gets the win over Florida State. Would you have put them at number one?
I would have put Miami at number one a couple weeks ago, to be honest with you. I just thought, their early games, beating Notre Dame in that opener, and then, you come back and look at the teams they beat subsequently. I thought they had the right resume to be the number one team. Now, I'm not saying they're flawless. I'm not saying that they can't be beaten. We don't know. I am a little concerned maybe about some of the stuff they've done in the fourth quarter when they're kind of sitting on leads. Everyone at some point this year is going to go back to Mario Cristobal's game management issues and the Georgia Tech game a couple years ago when he didn't kneel on the ball at the end and it bit him. There are definitely some questions there, and I don't know if they have the whole package to go on and win a national title. But right now, when you look at the landscape, it's either them or Ohio State, and I don't really see an argument for anybody else.
All right, the obligatory Notre Dame question for two Notre Dame grads here. Notre Dame lost by 3 points to the number 2 team, Miami. Lost by 1 point to the number 5 team, Texas A&M. At this point, Notre Dame does not play another ranked team the rest of their schedule. If they run the table and go 10-2, are they in the top 12 and make the playoffs?
I hate to just cop out on this answer, but it's going to depend on what happens everywhere else, because they're just not going to have the great resume with a win that stands out above what some of these teams in the SEC and the Big Ten who are in a similar position, let's say 2 losses, they're all going to have better wins than Notre Dame. Now, I think Notre Dame is a quality football team that belongs in the same breath as everybody else in that mix. And I think they're going to demonstrate that before the season's done. But it does require you to overlook the resume. And I don't know if the committee is going to do that or not. They've been directed by the conference commissioners this year to give a little more weight to strength of schedule than they did last year. How does that play out in the room with the conversations that go on among those committee members? I don't know, but I would be nervous if I'm Notre Dame, because some of the teams they need to be good, who are coming up later in the year on their schedule, are kind of busting right now and really not going to help them very much.
Yeah, matchup if you're Notre Dame this weekend in Southern Cal as Michigan comes to town for USC, who currently sits outside of that top 25 and on the schedule for Notre Dame in 2 weeks. Check out Dan's great work over at Yahoo Sports. Dan, we appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have another crazy weekend to talk about with you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.